The power grid fails at 6 a.m. By 8 a.m., the pharmacy's refrigeration is offline. By noon, the insulin is degrading. By 6 p.m., people are dying. And here's the thing nobody tells you. The medication didn't kill them. The supply chain did. Because that pharmacy, it doesn't stock more than 72 hours of critical medication. It never did. The system was designed to operate on perpetual motion, and perpetual motion stops the second the infrastructure fails. You think supply chains are about trucks and warehouses. They're not. They're about interdependent failure points linked in series, where one break cascades through the entire network. And 6 specific chains collapse so fast that by the time you realize they're gone, it's already too late to adapt. Protagonist designation: analytical observer of systematic collapse patterns. Companion: data collection drone with literal interpretation protocols. We've witnessed this sequence repeat across 14 regional breakdowns. The order never changes. The speed never slows. And the people who survive aren't the ones with the most gear. They're the ones who understood which chains break first. Today, you're learning the exact sequence, the specific timeframes, and the narrow windows where intervention is still possible. Because here's what they didn't tell you. These chains don't collapse because of catastrophic events. They collapse because they were built to operate at maximum efficiency with zero redundancy. One disruption, and the whole architecture fails. The first chain dies in 6 hours. The last one takes 3 weeks. But the damage from the first determines whether you survive to see the last. Chain 1, pharmaceutical cold storage. It fails first because it operates on the thinnest margin of error. Modern medication distribution relies on uninterrupted refrigeration from manufacture to injection. The average pharmacy maintains between 48 and 96 hours of temperature-sensitive inventory. Insulin, vaccines, biologics, certain antibiotics, they all require consistent cooling between 2 and 8 degrees Celsius. When the power grid fails, those refrigerators run on battery backup for approximately 4 to 6 hours. After that, the temperature starts climbing. Insulin begins denaturing at temperatures above 25 degrees Celsius. Complete loss of efficacy occurs within 12 to 18 hours of temperature excursion. But here's the problem. By the time you realize the cold chain is broken, the medication is already compromised. There's no visual indicator, no smell. The insulin looks identical. It just doesn't work anymore. The drone queries, why not increase backup power duration? Because backup power is expensive. Because regulatory minimum compliance is cheaper than actual resilience. Because the business model assumes uninterrupted infrastructure. The system was never designed to survive disruption. It was designed to maximize profit margin within stable conditions. Pharmaceutical cold chain collapse creates immediate mortality for insulin-dependent diabetics, people requiring certain cardiac medications, and anyone depending on refrigerated biologics. The window to acquire and properly store these medications is before the crisis. Once the chain breaks, there is no recovery. The medication that exists becomes worthless, and new supply doesn't arrive because the distribution network that delivers it is the same network that just failed. You're thinking, I'll stockpile. You can't. Temperature-sensitive medications have expiration dates precisely because they degrade even under optimal storage. Personal refrigeration fails the same way commercial refrigeration fails. Your home backup power lasts maybe 8 hours, maybe 12 if you're efficient. Then you're managing the same thermodynamic problem the pharmacy couldn't solve. The alternative nobody discusses: learning which medications have stable, non-refrigerated equivalents. Researching which treatments can be substituted with longer shelf-life compounds. Understanding that the industry preference for refrigerated biologics over stable alternatives isn't always medical necessity. Sometimes it's patent protection and profit margin. Chain 2, just-in-time grocery distribution. It collapses between 12 and 72 hours depending on population density. Modern supermarkets don't warehouse food. They operate as display floors for products stored in regional distribution centers. The average grocery store maintains approximately 3 days of inventory for routine demand. Under panic buying conditions, that inventory depletes in 4 to 8 hours. The resupply mechanism depends on uninterrupted trucking, functioning fuel stations, operational highways, and stable communication networks for logistics coordination. Remove any single element, and the delivery stops. The store doesn't have a warehouse full of backup food. The food that's visible is the food that exists. When it's gone, the next delivery isn't coming, because the distribution center that supplies it is facing the same depletion, and the trucks that would transport it can't operate without fuel, and the fuel stations can't pump without electricity. The time frame is predictable. Day 1, panic buying depletes high-demand items. Day 2, shelves are systematically emptied. Day 3, no new deliveries arrive. Day 4, the building is abandoned. You're not competing with rational actors making measured purchases. You're competing with crowd psychology and hoarding behavior. The person who clears the shelf isn't thinking about community sustainability. They're thinking about their family's immediate survival. And they're right to think that way, because the system offers no alternative. Here's what they don't tell you. The grocery store was never designed to be a food security solution. It's a just-in-time retail interface optimized for profit per square foot. Actual food security requires distributed production, local storage, and preserved goods with multi-year stability. The industry moved away from that model decades ago because centralized distribution generates better margins. Your vulnerability is their efficiency optimization, drone observation. Humans designed distribution system with zero redundancy, protagonist response. They designed it for maximum quarterly profit. Redundancy costs money. Fragility is externalized to the consumer. The buried solution, building personal food storage that doesn't depend on refrigeration or active infrastructure. Rice, beans, wheat, salt, sugar, oils, and sealed containers. Foods with 5 to 20 year stability under basic storage conditions. Not because you're paranoid, because thermodynamics and microbiology don't care about your supply chain assumptions. Properly stored dry goods outlast every grocery distribution network ever built. But acquiring that storage requires action before the panic. Once chain 2 collapses, the food that remains becomes a zero-sum competition. And competitions under scarcity conditions don't favor the unprepared. Before we continue, the patterns that follow aren't theoretical. They're documented failure sequences from infrastructure collapses across 6 continents. Subscribe to access the analysis corporate resilience consultants charge 5 figures to provide. Activate notifications. Comment with one supply chain vulnerability you've identified in your local area. Now let's talk about the chain that fails fastest in urban environments. Chain 3, municipal water treatment and distribution. Operational lifespan without power, 6 to 18 hours depending on system design. Modern water treatment requires continuous electrical power for pumping, filtration, chemical treatment, and pressure maintenance. When the grid fails, the treatment plant switches to backup generators. Those generators run until the diesel fuel is exhausted. In most municipal systems, that's between 6 and 12 hours. Once the generators stop, water pressure drops immediately. Within 2 hours, the distribution network begins draining through leaks and continued consumption. Within 6 hours, residential taps run dry. But here's the critical failure point. Even if power is restored, the system can't simply restart. Water treatment plants require specific startup sequences, chemical balance restoration, and filtration system priming. A cold start after complete shutdown can take 48 to 72 hours. And during that shutdown period, the water remaining in the distribution pipes becomes contaminated. Stagnant water in municipal systems develops bacterial growth within 24 hours. Biofilm formation begins within 48 hours. The water that eventually flows when the system restarts isn't safe for consumption without treatment. But the people turning on those taps don't know that. The water looks clear, it doesn't smell wrong, it just carries waterborne pathogens that produce symptoms 3 to 7 days after exposure. You're thinking, I'll boil it. You can if you have fuel. But most people exhaust their cooking fuel in the first 72 hours preparing food and sanitizing surfaces. By day 4, they're drinking contaminated water because dehydration is immediate and diarrheal disease is delayed. The choice feels obvious in the moment. It's still the wrong choice. The drone queries, why not maintain larger fuel reserves for generators? Because fuel storage is regulated, expensive, and requires maintenance. Because budget constraints prioritize routine operations over crisis resilience. Because the assumption is that grid failures are temporary and external fuel delivery will arrive. That assumption fails when the delivery trucks can't operate because the fuel stations can't pump because the electrical grid is down. It's circular dependency. And circular dependencies don't have graceful failure modes. The alternative: personal water storage and treatment capability that doesn't depend on municipal infrastructure. 6 months of drinking water in sealed containers. Filtration systems that operate without electricity. Chemical treatment knowledge for source water. Understanding that hydration isn't negotiable, so water security can't depend on systems you don't control. Municipal water system collapse forces immediate behavioral changes, drastic consumption reduction, source water identification, treatment protocol implementation. The people who survive aren't the ones with the most water. They're the ones who recognize that clean water is a chemistry and microbiology problem, not an infrastructure service you can assume continues. Chain 4. Electronic payment and banking systems. Functional duration without internet, 0 hours. Modern financial transactions require real-time network connectivity for authorization, verification, and settlement. Credit cards, debit cards, digital wallets, cryptocurrency, they all depend on active internet infrastructure and functioning servers. When the network fails, electronic payment ceases instantly. Physical cash becomes the only medium of exchange. But here's the problem. The average person carries less than $50 in physical currency. The average retail business maintains minimal cash reserves because electronic payment dominated transactions. Within hours of network failure, the available cash in circulation is exhausted through immediate survival purchases. And once it's concentrated in the hands of sellers, it doesn't recirculate efficiently because there's nothing left to buy. You're thinking, I'll withdraw cash before the crisis. You can try, but bank withdrawal limits, ATM daily maximums, and the physical cash reserves at local branches mean you're competing with everyone else who had the same idea. A standard bank branch holds between $50,000 and $200,000 in physical currency. In a city of 50,000 people, that's $4 per person, if distributed evenly. It won't be distributed evenly. The people who arrive first take everything available. The banking system isn't designed for physical currency distribution at scale. It's designed for electronic transaction processing. The cash that exists is a legacy interface for the small percentage of transactions that still require it. When that becomes the only interface, the volume overwhelms the available supply instantly. Drone observation. Electronic payment infrastructure has single point of failure, network connectivity. Protagonist response. Not a bug, a feature. Centralized transaction control enables monitoring, taxation, and restriction. Resilience was never the design goal. The alternative nobody discusses, maintaining physical currency reserves before network failure. Not because cash is superior to electronic payment. Because during the transition period between functional and failed infrastructure, cash is the only universally accepted medium of exchange. 3 to 6 months of routine expenses and small bills. Hidden, secured, and available for immediate deployment. But cash has limitations. It doesn't generate return, it's vulnerable to theft, and it becomes worthless if hyperinflation or currency collapse follows infrastructure failure. The optimal strategy isn't cash hoarding. It's understanding that payment systems are network dependent, and network dependent systems fail the instant connectivity fails. Chain 5. Prescription medication distribution through retail pharmacies. Independent of cold chain, most medications deplete within 48 to 96 hours. Pharmacies operate on inventory management systems designed to minimize carrying costs. The average retail pharmacy stocks 7 to 14 days of routine prescription demand. Under panic conditions, that inventory depletes in 2 to 3 days. The resupply mechanism depends on the same failed logistics networks affecting grocery distribution, trucks, fuel, highways, communication systems. But pharmaceutical supply chains have additional constraints: regulatory controls on controlled substances, specialized storage requirements, and manufacturer production limitations. When demand spikes and distribution fails, there's no rapid scaling option. The pills that exist are the pills available. Here's what kills people. Not the crisis event itself, but the medication withdrawal 3 days later. Cardiac patients without beta blockers. Psychiatric patients without antipsychotics. Epileptics without anticonvulsants. These aren't convenience medications. They're life maintenance chemistry, and the distribution system treats them like retail commodities with just-in-time delivery optimization. You're thinking, I'll get a 90-day supply. You can try. But insurance formularies restrict long-term prescriptions to reduce costs. Mail-order pharmacy takes weeks to process. Emergency fills require physician authorization. The system is designed to prevent stockpiling because stockpiling reduces prescription refill frequency, and refill frequency generates revenue. Your medical necessity conflicts with their business model. The drone queries. Why not allow patients to maintain personal medication reserves? Because unused medication doesn't generate recurring prescription fees. Because pharmacy benefit managers profit from transaction volume, not patient health outcomes. Because the regulatory framework treats patient stockpiling as potential diversion risk rather than resilience strategy. The buried solution, working with physicians who understand infrastructure fragility to obtain extended prescriptions legitimately. Researching which medications have longer shelf lives under proper storage. Understanding that some conditions can be managed with older, off-patent medications that have better availability and stability profiles. The newer medications aren't always medically superior. Sometimes they're patent-protected profit centers with planned obsolescence built into distribution models. Medication supply chain collapse separates people who planned from people who trusted the system to remain functional. The system was never trustworthy. It was optimized, and optimization eliminates redundancy. Chain 6. Fuel distribution for vehicles and generators. Operational duration without electricity, 0 to 6 hours depending on station design. Modern fuel stations require electrical power to operate pumps. When the grid fails, the fuel in underground storage tanks becomes inaccessible unless the station has backup generators. Most stations don't. The stations that do have generators run until their fuel reserves deplete, typically 6 to 12 hours. Once the pumps stop, the fuel remains underground but unreachable. Thousands of gallons trapped below the surface while vehicles run dry above it. Manual pump extraction is technically possible, but requires specialized equipment and creates safety hazards. The practical reality. When the power fails, the fuel station becomes a monument to inaccessible energy. But here's the cascading failure. Without accessible fuel, emergency generators stop running. Without generators, water treatment plants cease operation. Without water treatment, sanitation fails. Without sanitation, disease spreads. The fuel station isn't just a fuel station. It's a critical node in infrastructure interdependency. Its failure propagates through every system that assumed fuel availability. You're thinking, I'll fill my tank and store fuel cans. You can. But gasoline degrades through oxidation and evaporation. Untreated fuel becomes unusable in 3 to 6 months. Stabilizer additives extend that to 12 to 18 months. Diesel lasts slightly longer but develops biological contamination. The fuel you're storing today becomes worthless tomorrow unless you understand hydrocarbon chemistry and implement proper preservation protocols. The alternative, vehicles and generators that operate on fuels with longer stability profiles. Propane doesn't degrade. Natural gas infrastructure often remains operational longer than electrical grids because it's passive distribution. Understanding that the internal combustion engine was never optimized for resilience, it was optimized for energy density and existing infrastructure. Drone observation. Fuel accessibility depends on electrical power, creating circular dependency. Protagonist response. Every modern infrastructure system contains circular dependencies. They're invisible during normal operation. They become lethal during failure. Fuel distribution collapse immobilizes transportation, stops backup power generation, and eliminates the primary adaptation mechanism people assume they'll have during crisis: the ability to drive away. You can't drive without fuel. You can't get fuel without electricity. You can't get electricity without fuel. The loop doesn't have an exit unless you positioned yourself outside it before it closed. These 6 chains don't collapse independently. They fail in sequence, each failure accelerating the next. Pharmaceutical cold storage fails, creating medical crisis. Grocery distribution fails, creating food insecurity. Water treatment fails, creating sanitation emergency. Payment systems fail, creating economic paralysis. Medication supply fails, creating chronic disease crisis. Fuel distribution fails, eliminating adaptation options. The pattern is consistent across every collapse event. The systems built for maximum efficiency under stable conditions become maximum vulnerability during instability. And the instability doesn't announce itself with warning sirens and evacuation orders. It starts with a power outage, or a supply disruption, or a financial shock. Something small that wouldn't matter if the systems had redundancy. But they don't have redundancy. They have optimization. Here's what the preparedness industry won't tell you. You can't buy your way out of supply chain collapse. You can buy time. You can buy independence from specific chains. But actual resilience requires understanding that these systems were designed to fail gracefully under routine stress and catastrophically under exceptional stress. Your position when they fail determines your outcome. The people who survive supply chain collapse aren't the ones with the most stored food, water, and medication. They're the ones who recognize that stored means independent of systems I don't control. They're the ones who understood that 3 months of insulin in a failed refrigerator is worthless. That 6 months of food purchased after panic buying started is imaginary. That water from a contaminated tap kills you slowly. That cash withdrawn after banks restricted access doesn't exist. That medications prescribed through failed pharmacies never arrive. That fuel stored incorrectly becomes inert. You can't buy independence. You build it. You build it by understanding which chains fail first, by positioning outside those chains before they collapse, by accepting that the systems offering convenience during stability become traps during instability. Physics doesn't care about your assumptions. Thermodynamics doesn't respect your timeline. And supply chains don't pause while you figure out they're gone. What other supply chains belong on this list? What distribution systems in your area operate with zero redundancy and maximum efficiency? Comment with the infrastructure vulnerability you've identified that nobody's discussing, because the chains that fail aren't classified information. They're documented patterns. They're predictable sequences. They just don't generate profit by being solved, so they remain problems. Supply chains are control systems. They control when you eat, what medications you access, whether you have clean water, how you make transactions, where you can travel. And control systems built without redundancy aren't serving your resilience. They're serving someone else's efficiency. Physics doesn't optimize for profit margins.